I'm not going to stand there in the OR with the flu with some, regular mask that gaps on the sides and gets all wet underneath. I'm not going to stand there in the OR and do that. If I've got the flu, I'm going to stay home. I'm not going to give my patients the flu, and I'm not going to rely on a mask to not give them the flu. So then you get into that whole situation of what if you're asymptomatic?
Exactly.
What if you walked into work, someone had the flu yesterday, and now you're like in that 2-day prodrome where you're going to have the flu in a day or two. Then what happens with the mask? Does it protect you? Does it protect someone else? Well, we've looked at the studies, and most of the studies were small. And maybe they showed that it did protect, but they're too small. They're more like case studies than they are randomized control studies. And you know why they couldn't do a randomized control study? Because nobody would not wear a mask.
You're listening to Cleanse, Heal, Ignite podcast, and I'm your hostess, Diane Kaiser, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, former pro soccer player, transformational leader, holistic healer, and life purpose coach, helping you and your business awaken to your full potential. We are a transformation tribe of visionaries empowering passion-quenching, heart-centered advice to wellness warrior leaders on self-love, nutrition, mindset, and divorcing perfectionism. Our mission is to help you laugh your way to a sexy belly, love your way to vitality, and live your life with purpose by sharing real talk and truth drops that will help you cleanse your body, heal your hormones, and ignite your life. Side effects of this podcast may include all-day energy, happy hormones, perfect poops, increased confidence, becoming your own best healer, and catching the self-love virus. There's currently no vaccination to protect you from this and no known cure. In most cases, listeners experience a strong desire to accept new challenges, ditch toxic people, follow their heart, and dance like no one's watching. If you experience moods happier than usual, live it unapologetically and share with your social media friends immediately. Warriors, you're in for a treat with this episode. I go deep with Dr. Carolyn, who is an MD and has had many years of clinical experience and research with how studies even come out about whether or not masks work, or the things that are viruses and whether or not they are actually airborne and how long they last on countertops. A lot of the stuff that you hear that's out there about what's true is actually just about politics and money and who you know. So you go to dianekaiser.com to see the actual post that she had put up on one of my shares on social media, which catalyzed this episode. She's a very brave warrior, and I would call her a science whistleblower who's coming forward and sharing with us some of the things that are just not true about the research. And why I really care about this specifically is because many of you are out there wearing masks, you're wearing bandanas, and you're doing things for your children. And what we don't realize is the damage that it's causing when we are breathing in our own breath. And you may have also seen science that debunks that and says that it does not. Your own breath does not cause any damage to you. We are now seeing it happen all over the place. You see 70% of detoxification actually happens when we exhale. So when we exhale and we are exhaling our own toxins, we breathe our own toxins back in. So it makes sense to understand things like this before you just go out and wear masks compliantly out of fear and out of just plain and simple politics. So I'm going to read to you exactly the blue mask, the medical mask that many of us are wearing. It says this product is an ear loop mask. This product is not a respirator and will not provide any protection against COVID or other viruses or contaminants. Wearing an ear loop mask does not reduce the risk of contracting any disease or infection. User is solely responsible for the selection of appropriate personal protective equipment for the settings and application. Change immediately if contaminated, single use only. And many people are not using it for single use only, and many people are putting it on their children. So I wanted to provide clarity for you in this episode. And I also wanted you to go to dianekaiser.com and click on the podcasts section of my website so you could read the entire, like I said, post about what this really is all about, the real science, the real studies, how to understand it. And really ultimately all roads lead back to yourself and your intuition and your ability to smell something that just does not seem right? So that's what this episode is all about. And then also make sure you are on my list. If you have not gotten on my list just yet, make sure that you are, because if you're on my list, you will see this episode, and it also comes with a recommendation. I have provided to you guys, I've shopped far and wide for this because there are a lot of misnomers about what kind of masks actually work. And also the thing I'm concerned about for you the most is that you're not breathing in your own, essentially, you're not soaking your own sweat up on your skin again. You got to take a shower after you sweat, right? And I hope that when you poop, you're not putting it back in your body. It's the same thing with your breath, and you're breathing that back in with the mask. So if you're going to be using a mask, I want you to use a mask that is actually effective, because it will be mandatory for us to do things in the future, like travel. Mark my word, this is just, it's going to happen. I'm not a big fan of wearing masks. I am a fan of wearing masks to protect you for legitimate reasons. So I'm grateful to share that I have secured a 95% filtering, much more comfortable mask offer. And I have it for my warriors at 40% off. So make sure you're on my list. It may or may not be in the landing page of the podcast. You'll have the discount code, and you'll have the mask within a couple of days, because there's a lot of people ordering masks. They're not even receiving them. And there's just a lot of terrible offers out there promising that they'll send you these things out, and they just don't even arrive. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Carolyn. We're going to talk about masks. We're talking about science. We're going to talk about studies, and we're going to talk about the confusion before the chaos, before the consciousness. So what happens is that in order for us to reach consciousness, we must walk through confusion and what feels like chaos. And instead of resisting it, understanding it and questioning it, so that we can learn how to adapt and develop our own intuition and be extremely resilient through these times. I believe that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how to begin to free you from your mind, which is where we've been taught to believe everything doctors say. We have been taught to believe that everything that studies say are true, and that, air quotes, follow the science, or the CDC or the WHO. They've got it all down, when in actuality, if you follow the money, you'll learn what the actual dark agenda is behind these organizations that are being defunded very quickly because of how unstable they are. So let's get into the episode. And if this really, really, really tugged at your sleeve, please share this with other people, because we need to spread this truth far and wide. If you have any questions about this episode, or you'd like me to address any topics on further episodes, just go to dianekaiser.com/ask. Here we go.
Hey, warriors. This time I'm going to say freedom warriors. Welcome to another episode of Cleanse Your Body, Heal Your Hormones, Ignite Your Life. Hormone Warrior Transformation with Diane Kaiser. And today I have got Dr. Carolyn Messere, right? I said it right?
Yep, that's right.
Winning. I brought her on today because we, just like anything else, naturally in conversation, there's these threads of like, what's really going on here with this big transition that we've got. I'm not sure if I'm even allowed to say the word. So I'm going to say CV. Because I don't want this to get censored, because we've got a lot of important things to talk about today. Right. And what Dr. Carolyn had alluded to in one of my threads, and I'm out there on Facebook disrupting and diffusing and just being real, disastering. Some people might think that I'm a little bit on the edgy side, but I'm not I'm not trying to be out there scaring people. I'm trying to aware you guys. Mm-hmm. And like, the best way to think about this is like you're driving a car, and on the other side of that curve, there's going to be some black ice. So when it comes up, here's what you can do. I'm going to teach you how to drive so that you know how to navigate black ice. One day I almost actually ended up over a cliff because there's black ice. I used to drive Tahoe all the time and go snowboarding. Mm-hmm. And so my brother was driving through some black ice, and we did like 2 spins and ended up facing the other side of, in the other lane, facing traffic, facing what they were, what would have been oncoming traffic. But the other side of that would have been, we would have literally fallen off a cliff and died. So this is an analogy I wanted to use with you guys, just so that you could see, like, this is not like, oh my God, this is going to happen. Let's all be scared. Let's be prepared, right? Mm-hmm. And let's be educated. And I did want to show you this image. So Dr. Carolyn, this is the surprise I wanted to show you.
Yeah.
Is I'm going to share my screen right now for any of you guys who are actually watching this in YouTube format later on. This is the image that I wanted to share. And it's we can reference this during our interview today, Dr. Carolyn, is that what happens is that we tend to attach our mind to things that we already have been shaped to perceive or believe, and then we conceive from that. So who creates our thoughts? And then most of us stay imprisoned to those thoughts, and we don't have an open mind to other possibilities, is these 10 Ps that could become our prison bars if we keep a closed mind that this is the only way that life can be, right? So it's parents, peers, physicians, partners, which is our love partners, our positions at our job, pop culture, the press, politics, preachers, and the pedagogy, which the pedagogy is our schooling system.
Right.
So, and the quote that, if you guys are listening to this, it says that the top little quote is 10 bars of our self-inflicted prison, and that the hardest prison to escape is our own mind. And so what we want to do here today in this episode is talk about masks, talk about viruses, talk about studies, and how we can get so attached to how we have been taught, like talk to your doctor, they know everything, which is a physician's, prison bar. Or like our parents said, go to your doctor, they know everything because they've also been programmed. Or the press or the politics or president, or, all these things that say like, this is the way it is. And so many of us are confused and we're lost and we're worried and we're anxious. So what we want to do today is help you guys cultivate the courage to break free from these prison bars. And you can start to flow in your own thinking by keeping an open mind. And I know many people out there are saying that, hey, Dr. Carolyn, Diane, you guys just, put down your swords. People have their own narrative. They're going to believe what they're going to believe because of how they've been conditioned. But I want to talk about this with you on how, if people do have an open mind, what you would want to say to them about what's really going on out there with studies. Someone says, oh, study said this, or like the TV show said this, or a doctor said that. And so people are really confused and conflicted. So they compete and they compare, and it's all based on these prison bars. So Dr. Carolyn, how did you feel about that when you just saw that cage, based on your own experience as a doctor?
I feel like it's been coming more and more clear to me how that all works, because I know growing up, I grew up in a very conservative household, and it was kind of like, this is the way that it goes. And I'm the free spirit. I tortured my parents.
Me too.
My brother and sister did not know what to think about me most of the time, and they still really don't. And I'm like, I'm not going to say like I'm the world's freest thinker. I'm not. But I didn't buy the party line growing up. I didn't buy into the programming either at home or in school. I went to medical school and I had a hard time buying into the party line there too.
You just said three: parents, pedagogy, and physicians and pharmacy in school.
Partner's never really been that big an issue, but I've certainly been in jobs where I had to be careful about my politics, about my outside activities, about my love life, about my thoughts about things. I've had plenty of jobs like that, and I'm really lucky right now. I mean, I run my own business, but I also I work in a partnership with 2 other chiropractors, and they're very like-minded with me. So we've been open the entire time. We sat down, we had a meeting, the 3 of us, and we decided that we were going to stay open as long as they let us. And, we were lucky because state of Florida did not close down the chiropractors, the acupuncturists, the doctors. We were not told that we couldn't do routine care. So some places doctors were told no routine care, no procedures, none of that stuff. The only thing that we were told is that we couldn't overuse PPE. So
what does that stand for?
Protective. I can't even think of it. That's so funny. Yeah, masks, gloves, gowns,
right?
That stuff.
Right.
Personal protective equipment. That's what it is. Sorry.
Got it. Yeah.
So we were told that was the only thing, is that we couldn't overuse PPE. So we didn't. I don't work in a practice where we need to use that kind of stuff. My practice is really like one-on-one, face-to-face. And I certainly offered to my patients that they could talk on the phone if they wanted to.
Sure.
And many of them took me up on that. But some of them took me up on the idea that they could come in the office and be in a place where they felt seen, held, taken care of. I think that's been the biggest thing that's happened here, is the isolation, the separation, that notion that everyone's our enemy.
Yeah.
That we forget that it's the virus that's not, I don't even think the virus is our enemy.
Right.
But I certainly did not want to get caught up in the idea that other people are my enemy. And so if people came, wanted to come in the office, I was careful. I cleaned everything. We ran ozone at night. I had an air filter with a UV light on it in my office, kept the chairs 6 feet apart, didn't allow more than 2 people in the office at a time. we have good air conditioning. So, I mean, if you look at the data, the way that you prevent it is not having large groups of people in closed spaces, having adequate air circulation, keeping things clean. We did all of that.
Awesome.
And in the beginning, I'm not going to lie, I felt a little nervous about it. I'm lucky. I shouldn't say lucky. Both of my parents died last year. So I didn't have to worry about that I was going to bring the virus home to somebody that would get really sick from it.
Right.
I pretty much lived by myself. At the beginning of the virus, I had a boyfriend, but that didn't last.
Because you weren't wearing a mask?
No, for other reasons.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
We were actually pretty like-minded. I just think that we were, it was too much pressure too early on in the relationship.
Yeah, with a lot of what's happening in the environment, you mean?
Right. And also, I guess I needed a place that felt safe to me, and he didn't always feel that way for me.
Yeah, I think yes, and that's important for women, absolutely. And we're both strong women, but it's still important to have a safe place to express, to have emotions and not be called crazy or whatever the terms are that are out there that you guys, I don't even like to use the word conspiracy, because I think there's a lot of labels that get thrown around that could put people into containers and cause a lot of prejudice on our thinking instead of respecting where we're coming from. Right. So Dr. Carolyn, what kind of a doctor are you? I know that there's people who care about these kinds of things with like, what are qualifications? What have you done in terms of research and how you've really been involved in a lot of the behind the scenes politics and medicine?
Yeah. So before I ever went to medical school, I worked at Harvard Medical School. And I was the research assistant for a pretty big guy, full professor, named chair, the whole 9 yards, big guy. Published a lot of papers. We worked in alcoholism, and we also worked in zinc enzymes. So we did a couple of pretty interesting things. And it was interesting because one of the big things that happened when I was there is that we published a paper about a way to keep people from drinking too much alcohol. And it involved plant medicine, actually. It was kudzu, which is a weed that grows all over the South. But one of the guys that we worked with, he was experienced in Chinese medicine. And he came to the lab with the idea that maybe Chinese medicine could help us solve the alcoholism issue. And this thing hit big. We made the New York Times. We were on the cover of Time magazine. We got interviewed by every magazine, journal. Our paper was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. It was huge, 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 huge. What's funny is that you won't find anything about it. It never got used in alcohol treatment. It was pretty successful. What were the success rates for it? Pretty good. But the problem was that it was a plant that grew as a weed in the South. Why was that a problem? Can't make any money on that. Plants. Can't make any money on that. There was no way to patent it or to, you literally could go and buy the active ingredient in the kudzu was called daidzen, and it's in soy and it's in kudzu, and you could walk into any health food store and buy it. You still can. I mean, I shouldn't say any health food store, but you could easily get it in health food stores, and you certainly could find it in any Chinese medicine office. And what frustrates me when you were just saying that is that there are a lot of plants that have been used therapeutically that have been banned in certain stores. Like right now, they just took away colloidal silver from shelves in Whole Foods because of some kind of claim that people are saying that it would whatever for a virus. But I think that there's a lot of data out there, like you just said. You said zinc too, which really interests me. And there's things like kratom as well. It was another plant that was helping kratom. People. Yeah, kratom. And so I know that there's a lot. Are you able to speak about that? Because some of the things that probably my audience doesn't know, I may have said it in one of my interviews, but that what a lot of the physical structure of a lot of these prescription medications is the DNA structure of plants that they then replicate and add certain things to, and then mark up, like diabetes medication is, insulin medication is replications of cinnamon. So are you able to speak openly about that? So the thing about most of those things is that a lot of, I wouldn't say every medication out there is from used from a natural source, but a lot of things are. And, you know, aspirin is a prime example. It originally came from the white willow bark. And what's interesting is that, you know, what they found was that white willow bark was only minimally effective in treating fever, but when you isolated the active ingredient and you made a pill out of it, it was very effective. But what's funny about it is that if you look at what's the best way to run the course of an illness, it's not to stop the fever. So the white willow bark is still used. If you buy, I forget, it's Biocidin. Biocidin. If you buy Biocidin, white willow bark is one of the main ingredients. So it helps to temper, but it doesn't, you know, completely reverse your fever because your body needs to run a certain course. So it's kind of interesting that what we do is, and we've done this a few times where we've made medications that were from a plant, and then when we really like isolated it out, it was actually deadly or had severe side effects. But when it's in the plant itself, it might not be as effective. So trying to find a balance between what's going to be effective and what's going to not cause major problems and side effects. Because, you know, that's one thing we didn't really talk about what I do, did we?
No.
So what I do is I'm a functional medicine doctor. So I work with people to help them get away from multiple medications. So I don't stop people's medications. In fact, some people have to be on medications. If I've got a patient who comes to me that's been on metformin for 10, 15 years, the chances that I'm going to get their pancreas to work properly so that they don't need that medication are low, because the medication itself does damage to the pancreas over time. So I have to keep them on that medication. I can also teach them some better ways to eat, some lifestyle things, some ways to keep their cortisol levels down so that their blood sugar levels don't go up. So we work at that natural level, but I also work with medications. They used to call that integrative medicine, but I think that we've kind of moved away from that term a little bit. What I do is functional medicine, and even that, you know, that's always, we've talked about that as getting down to the root of the problem. But what we're starting to find is that the more we study functional medicine, we find that the root of the problem is there's another root underneath the root of the problem, and there's probably another root under that.
Yes.
And what it ultimately comes down to is that my job is to make your cells function the best that they possibly can. And, you know, that can mean the cells in your GI tract, the cells in your pancreas, the cells in your thyroid, but so that your body is doing the best that it can to manage itself. That doesn't mean I don't work with medications, because I do.
Right. And you're an MD, so you can actually prescribe too, right? Yeah.
I am, yeah.
And one of the things that, being that you are an MD, and being that, you know, of course, that gets the ears and respect of a lot of people to consider what you're saying. So one of the things I'd love to transition over to, being that you have a lot of history in doing the research and doing, you know, the studies and seeing the other side of that, is that, you know, you have a goal to help people get well by boosting their own ability to get well. And if they can get off medications, because many of them are very toxic and many of them have their own side effects. We've all seen commercials, especially now at an all-time high in between political hearings. I'm like, God, I have not heard the word diarrhea so much as I have in the last few days since my family's been here watching the news. I'm like, okay.
That and new normal.
Got it. Yeah.
New normal diarrhea.
Yeah, new normal
might
diarrhea.
go together.
Really interesting point, Dr. Carolyn. New normal diarrhea, new normal sudden death, new normal suicide rate.
High blood sugar.
I'm like, this is funny, but it's cheeky, but it's not funny.
Right.
So the new normal is becoming this social distancing, is mask wearing, is what I call PTFD, point the finger disorder. It's their fault.
Right.
I have not done anything. So I don't know if there's a drug yet for that, because I don't think it's a coined disease.
Give it time.
Yeah, right. So I coined that one, just kind of be cheeky as well. Point the finger disorder. In other words, I'm not going to take ownership. So I want people to, you know, in the second half of our interview here, I really want to dig into the mask piece. I really want to go into the 6-foot social distancing, like what this virus thing and in your perspective, because you have a lot of experience here.
Yeah.
And then also talk about, you know, getting the virus through the eyes. Like, there's just so many things out there, and even like the cognitive dissonance is an all-time high. And I'm not a doctor, so I don't know these things either, but I can use my intuition that something doesn't smell right. So let's start with the mask piece, or actually even the studies, the research, because
Right.
Studies show
Right.
and that one of the prison bars is people go, oh, okay, politics and the physicians who have done these research papers, I will respect them and I will not even question it. So what's the problem in that? And what did you learn in doing a lot of research and writing research papers over the 6 years that you did it?
I was at Harvard for 6 years. That was before I went to medical school. Yeah. So the thing that I learned was there's a couple things that go on there. One is that your stuff isn't even going to be seen if you don't know the right people.
Mm-hmm.
So
politics.
Yeah. So what would happen in my job there as research assistant was also to be administrative assistant. I opened the mail. This was my right after college job. I didn't have a lot of experience. I was lucky enough to have a bachelor in science, but my bachelor in science was in business. So I was not a biochemistry professor,
Mm-hmm.
So I opened the mail, and every day there would be like 10 letters from some small lab somewhere, and they all over the world. I'm not talking about just in the United States, but some small lab somewhere that was hoping to get our attention because that Harvard Medical School, name on your paper was going to get your paper seen by the right people.
Mm-hmm.
So that request, if we could just if we could just look over their data, could we look at their paper? Could we, consider putting our name on their paper so that they would be, or could we even we were also editors at some big journals. So Proceedings of the National Academy of Science and Biochemistry and a couple of other smaller ones, Cell. There was a bunch of those.
What was it called? Cell?
Cell. We were a biochemistry lab. So so we got those requests all day long, someone hoping that they would get some attention from a big guy so that they would be able to get their paper out there. And some of the papers were good. Some of them were really terrible. So you just had to keep looking through them and trying to figure out who deserved that, that little bit of attention that was going to make a difference.
Right.
But it was also like if there was somebody out there that was doing similar research to yours and they had a better sponsor, your stuff was probably going to get pushed to the back of the journal. Or put in the smaller journals, not in the big major journals.
Right. So what do you mean by sponsor?
Like what my boss would do is he would sponsor these guys. He would put his name as the last author on the paper. Mm-hmm. So if you look at papers, there's a first author and there's often a last author. And a lot of people don't even look at the last author. But that last author, if you run a bio on him, her, nowadays, back then it was almost all men. But if you run a bio on that last author, what you're going to find is that they probably run a big lab that publishes a lot of papers. Mm. So what's the
financial, there's a financial incentive there, I would imagine then, or is there someone who, when you say sponsor, it's just someone who
there's not money involved.
Okay.
It's really just getting, not usually money involved. It's really just getting the research to be seen. Mm-hmm. And then there was the whole process of how you get money from the NIH. You have to write a grant. Your grant has to be approved first by the university, and then it has to be sent into the lab, and it's usually rewritten until you get to a place where they are interested in that research that you want to do. Mm-hmm. So it looks to them like something that's worthwhile doing. So that means that everything gets a little edited, managed, pushed into a certain, it's like if you've ever done pottery on a wheel, everybody's got their hands in that pottery trying to get that to be the right shape.
Right.
So, and if things don't go the way that you want them to, it gets thrown away.
Right.
It doesn't ever see the light of day. So that to me was a little bit scary. And I'm not going to say that that I'm the only one who saw it, because if you do a little bit of research, there's people that have disputed many of the big research studies. For example, the Framingham Heart Study has been heavily disputed. It just takes a little bit of research to go in and look at the more recent papers and looking at what got focused on in Framingham Heart and what got thrown out. Mm. And so I'm not making this up. People may sit there and go, oh, she's just, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm not the only one that sees this. I'm not the only one that saw it. It exists out there, and there is information out there that shows that a lot of these research studies, and by no means am I pointing out Harvard.
Right.
Harvard was just one wheel in a big cog, and definitely for sure some amazing and wonderful things came out, even of my own lab. I'm not saying that it didn't, but you just have to watch the politics. And right now, what we're going through with this particular virus that we won't name, is that all of these guys that do this kind of research, this is their moment. This is their stage.
Yeah.
This is their chance to get their work seen. And so they're going to put together whatever they can put together so that it's going to get published. So a lot of stuff got rushed in. If you look at the rxiv.org, and there's a couple of other similar sites, there's a lot of papers there that are already up, already available. You can look at them. They haven't been peer reviewed. So nobody's really looked at it and said, excuse me, but you started this off with an assumption and you didn't prove your assumption.
Right.
So my job when I worked at Harvard, I didn't do much of this. I was the assistant, but it was my job to look through the papers initially and see what I thought about them. And then my boss was a very well-known PhD, and he would just pick through those papers like a crazy man. Nope, they didn't prove this. Nope, they spelled, this is all wrong. This doesn't look right. Get back to them, Carolyn, and just tell them we'd like to see it, put a little bit more succinctly, or they didn't prove this point. Do they have the reference that fits this? So that was my job, was to get in touch with scientists and have them, rework their paper so that it was actually factual, as close as you could get to factual.
Exactly, because I think at this point it's like, the question is like, what is truth? How do any of us know that anything is true? We run it through our filter system. We run it through the biology and the chemistry of our body, and everything's always going to affect people differently. Like I talk about, as somebody who's really passionate about helping women understand like what toxic beauty is, and breast implants and Botox. And speaking of studies, there's not even been long-term studies on any of these things to determine their safety. Like we have become the studies. And so now it's like, some of us think we look like we're just hypochondriatic, crazy women out there saying, oh, hey, like these things are kind of toxic. Well, has there been a study on that? No, there hasn't been long-term studies, because they profit greatly from, having these things out there. And then it would also make them look really bad that they haven't done long-term studies. And then they measured, Botox and breast implants in the body. And when those two meet, or another thing on the outside, like a virus that then meets with those two things, it's like, you have just so many things that you can't predict these things. And I think there's a lot of people out there who think, and who really want to latch onto a belief because it makes them feel safe. Like, oh, okay, they've proven it's safe. Okay, I can carry on because I want to feel, like you said earlier about relationships, I want to feel safe. I want to feel like it's an okay thing to do. So I'd love to get into some of the things that you'd also been really bold about out there with respect to, the whole mask thing and the ventilators. And so one of the things, I just wanted to quote you, because when I saw this, I went, whoa, woman, bold. I thank you for having the courage to say this, because in uncertain times, people are looking for certainty. So whatever certainty you can, safety, whatever that looks like, based on what I'm about to say here, would be great. Because I think what we're both trying to get people to do is think for themselves instead of just latch on to, oh, they've done the studies, done, I could be safe, I can move on. A mask is an artificial sense of safety. And so that's what I want to get into now. You said, because you said, I can poke holes in any science. I learned from the best, and your job is to read through these studies and find the bias, right? And what you said is the study about the asymptomatic spread already discredited. The study about how long the virus...
the small one that was in New England Journal.
Oh, okay, yeah, run with that one. What did you mean by that?
So there was a small one in New England Journal that was the earliest one that they used to talk about asymptomatic spread. And it was a woman, I don't have the study right in front of me, but I believe she was from Hong Kong, or she was somewhere from Asia. And she went to a conference and she was around other people, and then they got the virus. And they claimed that she was asymptomatic and that she spread it to these people at this conference. And they published this paper without ever discussing it with her, without being able to find her, is what they said. That they made a good faith effort to find her. And then someone else did find her, and it turned out that she had been taking Tylenol for a couple of days because she'd had a fever and she was achy. So she wasn't asymptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
Probably was symptomatic with the virus. So she was spreading it to them, but she was symptomatic. There's another study that showed that there was something like 44% of cases in a small study. It wasn't like 44% of all cases everywhere. But in one study that they did, 44% of the cases, they couldn't trace the person who gave it to them. They traced it back to somebody who was asymptomatic. But what's interesting about that study is that, again, it's conjecture. If you read the study itself, it doesn't actually say without a doubt,
Mm-hmm.
with certainty. But what's funny is that all the studies that quote it now say, we've already shown that.
Right.
So then you've got all these studies, but if you trace back and you trace back and you trace back and you trace back to the original study doesn't really prove their point. And it's a small study. So it's underpowered is what we call it in research. There's not enough people in the study to call it one thing or another.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to look at all of that. And the thing is, I don't think it's fair to expect the average person to read through these studies and figure out what's right and what's not.
Nailed it. That's what I keep saying too. When people say in these, the Facebook comments back and forth, and people are warring and they're being so judgmental and really immature. Oh, do the math, do the homework, do your research, enlighten yourself, or whatever these accusations are. Like, it's all out there. It's like, no, it's not. And
yeah.
I'm not a doctor, but I'm a functional, functional medicine and functional nutrition practitioner. And that's what we do in our practice. And we have functional medicine doctors in our practice. So, we do a lot of our own homework, and it's still confusing. There's still so many different, it's like, you cannot possibly do your research. People are just, do your research, people. It's so belittling. And who has time for all of that right now when you are a mom and you're a business owner and all these different hats to wear? We just don't have time. So when it comes to, even the mask thing, because I know that's the biggest one, the mask and the ventilator, and can it spread? And I'd love to start talking about the mask thing, because that one is...
Yeah. So one of the things to know about me is that I was a colorectal surgeon for 10 years. So I wore a mask every day. But it was a particular kind of mask, it was a medical mask. If we had somebody with, for example, TB, we wore the N95 mask. But you have to be fitted for that mask, and you have to be trained in how to use it. And it has to be like, even when if you're in the operating room and you've got that mask on, the nurses have to watch you to make sure that it stays on your face correctly. Because the more you're talking and the more you're like yawning, chewing gum, whatever it is that you're doing, you're moving that mask around. Plus it gets up underneath their glasses and it fogs your face up. So people are constantly having to move, take your glasses off, clean them off before you put them back on, so it's not pleasant. First of all, it's not pleasant to wear those masks. You get hot. It steams your face off and you sweat underneath it. And it's hard for me to believe that, like, if this were true, I'm not saying it is, but if it were true that I had a virus droplet over here and I start to sweat and it drips down under my mask, how does that prevent me from having something happen to me? It doesn't really. So you can't put all your eggs in that basket. However, what I am going to say is this. You'll never get me to say that medical personnel shouldn't wear a mask. They have to. And it's not just to protect themselves. It's also to protect the patient. But for most of us, the reason we wore a mask in the OR, for the most part, was really just the normal stuff. We didn't go to the OR if we had the flu. I'm not going to stand there in the OR with the flu with some, regular mask that gaps on the sides and gets all wet underneath. I'm not going to stand there in the OR and do that. If I've got the flu, I'm going to stay home. I'm not going to give my patients the flu, and I'm not going to rely on a mask to not give them the flu. So then you get into that whole situation of, what if you're asymptomatic?
Exactly.
What if you walked into work, someone had the flu yesterday, and now you're like in that 2-day prodrome where you're going to have the flu in a day or two. Then what happens with the mask? Does it protect you? Does it protect someone else? Well, we've looked at the studies, and most of the studies were small. And maybe they showed that it did protect, but they're too small. They're more like case studies than they are randomized control studies. And you know why they couldn't do a randomized control study? Because nobody would not wear a mask. We couldn't get anybody to, they couldn't, in their research studies, they couldn't get anybody to agree not to wear a mask. Mm-hmm. If they were going to be around somebody who was sick, they want to wear a mask. It makes them feel better, right? It's again, that safety, right? That's a human thing. We want to feel safe. But did we prove that the mask makes a difference? No. And what I can say about the cloth masks is that every study that I've read does not show that the cloth mask is really that effective in either preventing other people from getting something from you, nor in preventing you from getting something from someone else. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, there's been lots and lots of talk about the masks in Korea and in Japan, and that people wear the mask and it seems to lower the risk of spread. That might be true. I don't know. I don't feel like we have the science for it. I feel like at the same time, if it makes you feel better to wear a mask, and that's, us not being stressed out is really important. You know that, right? That's part of both of our practice, mm-hmm. is teaching people not to be stressed out. So if you feeling better by wearing a mask makes you less stressed out, it probably does make you less likely to catch it.
Placebo.
It might even make you less likely to give it to someone else.
Yeah. And I think that's the confusion, right? Is that, like, for me, I don't live in fear. I don't live in stupidity and extremely ridiculous, uncalculated risk. I think there's always, better safe than sorry, but also, like, there's a line too, at which point right now it's like people are saying, well, better safe than sorry means that you should wear a mask too. And mm-hmm. I'm thinking, but I also take responsibility for my immune system, and I teach people how to have a stronger immune system. And we look at labs to reveal those sorts of things. So mm-hmm. I don't want to live my life in fear that we have to be in defense all the time. So I wonder about that too, is that mm-hmm. people who are judging people who are deciding, like, when you go out in public, because here in Arizona where I live now, it's not mandated to wear a mask. So it's kind of like a half and half. Half the people at the store are wearing a mask, the other half of the people aren't. So, if we look to Hollywood, and we look at Hollywood as a possible predictor of future events, a lot of these films are showing the more, what are the masks that they have where there's like, it covers almost your whole face and you're breathing.
Ventilator mask.
Yeah, the ventilator.
Respirator mask.
Is that what they're called? The ones that are completely
the ones that have
covered.
like the things that come out of the
they come out. Yeah, it looks like almost like an animal. So
and it's interesting because that is, I think if you look at the pictures from Italy, they did use those when they were taking care of patients.
When? Yeah. So now that there's a question of, well, we don't know this virus well enough. Like it could be spreading all over the place. So I guess what would you say to people who are in the space of, I won't wear a mask. I don't feel sick. And if I get sick, then I trust that my immune system is strong enough to handle it. So what would you say to that?
Well, I think I have a lot of things to say about that. And I'm not sure we even have time to say them all.
Yeah.
But I think that someone else wearing a mask, I think that where we get into danger with that is that there are a lot of people that think that, for example, say, I don't want to wear a mask. If I don't wear a mask, then I'm putting you at danger, that I'm being irresponsible, that I don't care about you, that I don't care about the virus, that I'm some kind of conspiracy theorist who doesn't believe it's real. That there's a lot of prejudgment, there's a lot of conjecture, there's a lot of assumption about me in my choice not to wear a mask. And, and also that idea of like, well, she doesn't want to wear it because it's uncomfortable. How come her discomfort is more important than my health?
Right.
And, and here's the funny thing. I have asthma. I actually could just not wear, I could go anywhere I wanted and say, look, you know what? I have asthma and I can't wear a mask. It's hard for me to say that because I spent all day in an OR every day wearing a mask. And it didn't really, I don't know that it caused me any issues. I'll be honest with you, since I'm not in the OR wearing a mask all day long, I'm a happier person. But I don't know if that's just because I don't work in an environment that made me unhappy.
Mm-hmm, true.
So I don't know, again, no science there, right?
Yeah, right.
But so, and the truth is, if I got to go to Fresh Market, they have a sign asking us to wear a face covering. I'll wear a mask. Mm-hmm. It's for 25 minutes while I'm in the store. It's not, you know, it's not a big deal to me. But I understand that for some people, it is a big deal. It does mean something to them. And, you know, and the thing is that where do you get to decide what I do? And how do you get to decide that I am putting you at danger when, you know, and my favorite one is all the people that say, well, you know, if you don't wear a mask, then you're not entitled to health care.
Right.
Excuse me? Okay, so if you don't quit smoking, if you don't stop drinking 3 glasses of wine every night, if you don't stop eating sugar, if you don't stop taking 5 million medications that have all these side effects, how is that different? I don't understand how that's different. Where does the line lie? You know, like I don't want to be around people who smoke. That's my personal preference.
Me too.
If I didn't want to be around people who didn't want to wear a mask, I'd stay home. We're all perfectly entitled to stay home. We're all perfectly entitled to have our food delivered. You know, we're all perfectly entitled to run up a bill on Amazon. And even here in Florida, the wine stores deliver. Yeah,
exactly. And it's funny, that essential.
So if I want to make a choice about what other people do, then what I do is I don't go to bars where people smoke. I try not to be around, you know, I try, like, for example, if I go to a restaurant and every time I walk in that restaurant, someone's standing outside smoking, I'm probably going to stop going to that restaurant. When I lived in Miami and everybody smoked in the outdoor part of the restaurant, I stopped sitting outdoors.
Me too. I can't. That's a great example too, because my dad smoked still, and my whole family really did, and so I became very whatever that it is, nicotine sensitive or whatever additives that are in them. So for me, if I could smell cigarettes even far away when someone's smoking, it instantly affects my head. So I don't go near it, and I opt to not be around it. But if it's in a restaurant where there is actually, at least in California, there was a mandate where you shouldn't be smoking, you know, within certain level of feet, and they're breaking that rule, then that showed that restaurant didn't really prioritize, you know, their visitors. So same thing. So I think, but I think there's the different level of it is that this virus can easily jump. I mean, is there science on that? Like, is that what we're still waiting for? Is that why people are living in such fear?
I think that we don't know.
And even through the eyes too. Like, I know that was another thing we want to talk about.
We don't know if it spreads asymptomatically. It probably does, but I don't know if that's a major part of how it spreads from person to person. What we see over and over again, my favorite example of this is the 2 boats, right? The Theodore Roosevelt and the Diamond Princess. So those are closed environments where the virus was introduced, and a certain number of people got the virus, and a certain number of people were sick enough to need hospitalization, and a certain number of people died. And like I said, closed environment. And we have 2 different examples, because the Theodore Roosevelt, that's pretty much young, healthy people, right? That was the carrier. That's, if you don't remember the case, it's where the captain was fired, and then they reinstated him. Because he tried to get that situation taken care of, and he didn't go through the right channels. So if you look at the Theodore Roosevelt, about 20% of people on the boat got the virus. Most of them were asymptomatic. Out of that 20% of people, I believe, unless the numbers have been updated more recently, only 1 person died. So you're talking about a group of people who were in their 20s to 40s. Because most people in the Navy are going to retire by the time they get into their mid to late 40s. You won't see a lot of people that are going to be over that age. So you're talking about a very certain population of people who are required to exercise because of their job and have a certain level of health. So you've got that environment. Now, there was a little bit of going off the ship and coming on the ship, so it's not a perfectly closed environment, but it really gives you some pretty good sense of how it spreads, right? And then you look at the Diamond Princess. Now, that was an early on thing that happened, but that was an older population. Still, 20% of people on the boat were positive. They tested, the nice thing about both of these situations is they tested everyone. So, and one thing we should probably talk about is the testing accurate? Right. That's another issue, right? So we tested everyone on both ships. We looked at who was symptomatic and who was asymptomatic. We looked at who was sick enough to need treatment, and we looked at how many people died. And if you look at those numbers, you can see that in that population on the Diamond Princess, again, about 20% of the people who were on the ship got the virus. Many of them, again, were asymptomatic. There was a certain number of people that ended up hospitalized or needing care. They ended up in the infirmary because they couldn't get off the ship. And there was a certain number of people that died. I believe it was 8. So there was 3,500 people on the ship. About 700 people got the virus and 8 people died. So out of that population, which again, older population, most of the people on that ship were between 50 and 80. And also perhaps not, yes, healthy enough to walk around, but probably most of the people who got sick were on at least one medication. So you got to look at that population. 1% of the people who got the virus died. On the Theodore Roosevelt, way less than 1%, you're looking at a difference in the ages. But we can get a pretty good sense of how this thing works, right? That people who are even in close contact with each other, only about 20% of them got the virus. And these are people that didn't know the virus was on the ship. So they were eating in the same rooms. They were hanging out in the same gym. They were, walking around in the same parts of the ship. Same thing. They did another one where people were in an office and only people on one side of the office got the virus. So yes, it spreads. Yes, it probably does have some asymptomatic or early symptom prodrome spread. I'm not going to say no to any of that. We don't know. And what I said in my Facebook post is that it could take years for us to have all the data that we need here, but we've got to make decisions from one day to the next. So we have to decide what makes the most sense to us. And honestly, I feel like if people want to stay home, I don't have a problem with that. And if people want to go out to the store and they want to wear a mask, I think they need to understand that they might be putting a little too much confidence in that mask.
Right.
And in someone else's mask.
Because those masks too, they actually could infect you and cause health issues to the person wearing it. Is that right? The cloth mask?
I think the thing that we have to look at is I'll have to find the link. It's been open on my phone for a couple of days, and I've been trying to get through the whole paper. But basically what they said about the cloth masks is that what they give people is a sense of confidence, but it doesn't necessarily shift your ability to be infected or not infected. That there's a lot of, they did a study just recently, and it's a small study. So again, it's going to be what scientists would call underpowered. They did a study where they took people who, they volunteered, people who had the virus volunteered to do the study. It was only, I think, 6 people. And they put a mask on them, different kinds of masks. So they had them cough with no mask into a petri dish, cough with a medical mask into a petri dish, cough with a cloth mask into a petri dish. And then they swabbed the outsides and the insides of the masks. And they looked at the spread. And what was interesting is that on some of the masks, they didn't find anything on the inside of the mask, but they found something on the outside. They haven't explained that. We don't know what the explanation of that is. It might just be that it wasn't enough on the inside, that it all blew through the mask. There wasn't enough inside to get a good culture, but there was on the outside because they coughed. Everyone had to cough into so when they coughed, they might have expelled the virus right through the mask and it didn't stay on the inside.
Oh gosh, wow.
So
bottom,
again, small study, not enough for me to say without question, masks don't work.
Right. So here it would be, in summary, because I've got to get going here for my next appointment.
I know,
No, it's great. This is great stuff. It's in summary is that there's still not enough information out there to say whether we can infect each other or not, mask or not, especially the ones that we're using. And so we either get to live, in caution or in fear, which we get to decide that. But it shouldn't be enough to impose that someone is, walking, shopping irresponsibly. Consider we haven't had any proof to any of these things, even a medication or even, an injection, I should say. So there's just not enough proof out there. So we should have it to where, as a doctor, you're saying we should get to decide what makes the most sense for us until we have more data and studies that are proven without being financially funded or skewed or adulterated to fit a certain narrative. And that's the other piece of this.
And be super careful about what hits the headlines.
Right. Exactly.
You know, and that absolutely, you know, I absolutely saw that when I was working in science. Be super careful of what hits the headlines, and be super careful of how that reporter wrote that study up. Because a lot of times I'll read their report and then I'll go back and read the paper. They don't necessarily match.
And see, for us out there, we don't know how to read those things. So my last question for you right now is who would you suggest that we do follow when we say, be careful who you follow? Because everything is based on the programming of how we were taught to think as a kid. And if we only think that the mainstream media or the news or like whatever doctor or Fauci or CDC or the whoever, NIH, who do you trust for the data? Being that we can't read studies and papers and understand them well, who would you say that would be someone we could follow and be as neutral or as intelligent about these things as possible?
Wow. I wish I had an answer to that question.
I know, right?
I do. I wish I had an answer to that question, because what I've seen is that, you know, I definitely have seen that certain news agencies seem to glom onto certain kinds of news.
Right.
And I'm not going to say that everything they report is inaccurate. It's not. But is there a bias? I think there is a bias. And it was interesting because somebody, in argument to something that I wrote, published this curve with all the different news agencies and whether they were liberal or conservative and whether they were trustworthy or not trustworthy, you know, like were they factually based. Some guy actually tried to tell me that Wikipedia was 98% accurate. Wikipedia is not a good source of data, okay? Let's face it. Wikipedia is not a good source of data. I would say that, you know, for the most part, the news journals are not, I mean, I think the truth is there's good data out there, and you just have to learn how to pick through it and not buy into the underlying bias of that source. So know which sources are kind of on the liberal side. Know which sources are kind of on the conservative side. People have always said BBC was very reliable. Well, the BBC came out and admitted that they changed Trump's discussion about the disinfectant. So can you even trust the BBC?
Right. This is where I think that we're getting to the point where it's like...
And does that make me a conspiracy theorist? I don't think so. I think it, you know, I started off when we started talking before we recorded, I'm a middle of the road girl, okay? I'm not buying everything that's in Plandemic, and I'm not buying everything that's in Newsweek. And I'm gonna run my slalom through the two and figure out what works the best for me. And I understand that doesn't sound like, oh, well, I mean, maybe you're making mistakes, maybe you're doing things wrong, maybe you've infected other people, maybe you've done this, maybe you've done that. Okay. I'm a human, take responsibility for myself. You know, one of the things that I've learned about myself is that when I'm under pressure, I'm manipulative. Guess what? We all are. Everyone is. Okay. All the reporters are. Dr. Fauci is. Dr. Birx is. President Trump is. What's her name? Nancy Pelosi. Everyone's manipulative when they don't think they're going to get their way.
Yes. Such a great point to end on is that working with human psyches and their egos and understanding all the tricks that our egos play, which as long as you're a human, you have an ego. So if you claim to know everything or have it all figured out, that is all an agenda of the ego. No one has it all figured out. And so when we're living in fear, the natural tendency of the ego, you know, our reptilian brain with the fight or flight, you know, the amygdala does, and limbic system, it goes into fear. When we're in fear, we go into panic, and when we're in panic, we go into fight or flight. What that all means is that we're in the state of, okay, we become hyper vigilant about self-protection and preservation and to not dying. So we become irrational, and you know, this is like what most of us are living in 70% of our day, you know, according to the work of Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza. And so when we're in this state of fight or flight, we literally turned into a narcissist. That's what the natural state of the ego does. So we hear a lot of these finger points of like, oh, they're a narcissist. It's like, that's a pot calling a kettle black. We are all on the spectrum of somewhere of being a narcissist, of being manipulative, of being like not truthful. It's programmed into humans.
Yeah.
So we've got to stop this finger pointing stuff, and we have to get to somewhere in the middle of that is your
truth. We can't
truth.
think of each other as enemies.
Exactly.
We're not enemies.
No.
Like I said, I'm not even sure. I think the virus is our enemy.
Exactly. That's what my intuition says.
Thing.
It's doing its thing. It's a virus out there doing its thing. Was this man-made? Was it like, where did it come from?
I don't know.
Who cares? At this point, what matters is go with your intuition, go with your gut, and realize that we are all just doing our best. Yeah. And if you judge, we could all feel each other when we're being judged. That could also be, but that's just it. No more name calling. We need to get to the bottom of this and get with your own trust and find out what that is. And also realize how you become imprisoned to each one of those P's.
Yeah.
If you think that a doctor knows more than you, then you're in a prison. However, they do, like what we've got here is Dr. Carolyn. She's done her research. She knows more about how to read a paper than someone like I would do. What's best for my body? Well, you can co-create this with other people, but to say that this person absolutely, without a shadow of doubt, knows better than you, you're in a prison. But when you can co-create a decision for yourself that is not going to be the same for anybody else, then you are co-creating, and then you're not pedestalizing anybody.
Right.
And that's a place where
you're not in the prison of the P's.
Exactly. No P prisons. So it's just like, okay, they're experienced at that. So I'm going to, take what they say with some respect, but also with a grain of salt. And so there's just so much, I think, that we need to question about how we make our decisions based on our narrative and based on our upbringing, that I think there's a way to come together. And that's why I brought you on today, because there is no for sure, everything paper and publishing and it's just too much. So we come together in the middle.
So I have two quick things that I want to say, if I can. One of the things
real fast, because I'm 8 minutes late for lunch.
I know. So one of the things is that our limbic system is part of our brain. It is designed for this vigilance, the enemy, assessing the environment. And we have a higher mind that works above that limbic system. We just have to access it. And so if you're out and you see somebody without a mask and it makes you sweat, why? Why? What's going on there? And then the other thing is that we have this vagus nerve, and your vagus nerve runs your parasympathetic system, rest, digest. So what you were talking about, that's the sympathetic nervous system that runs everything, makes everything crazy. We're assessing our environment around us all the time, which also makes our blood sugar go up, which makes us more susceptible to a lot of things that can come along. So the more that we can get ourselves into our vagus system, the more that you can teach yourself that calming mechanism. So meditation, gargling, singing. There's a bunch of things that you can do that are going to activate the vagus nerve. And so if you're doing those kinds of things every day, look, you're sitting at home anyway. Why don't you teach your brain to think for itself a little bit? Why don't you teach yourself to calm your nervous system down? And don't just rely on wine or other substances or TV to numb you out. Get in touch with that part of your brain that's that higher reasoning that's going to allow you to have great relationships with people around you.
Right. It's so important. And how to do that, you guys, is high vibrational things, is to not hang out with people who are constantly living in fear, stay away from all the sugars. Just like she said, there are so many different ways to do that. So, but we tend to grab for the stressful, we eat stressfully, we eat emotionally. And so it's this whole system that feeds itself. So it just takes making a decision. And I had a dream last night that was guiding me away from more of the fear about what Trump just said yesterday or whatever, and what other people are responding to. But okay, it's time to shift this a little bit. So if you trust yourself that your dreams show up for a reason, that people in your life show up for a reason, everything is a mirror, then you can start to become a student of life instead of a victim of it. So it's always, the life is always showing, how you see the world is always showing you an opportunity to grow and to go inside and to find your calm and find your peace. Realize that you don't have to get swayed so much by what's out there. Find your center, live in your center, realize that you're always doing your best and there's no way to change yesterday. So living in guilt is just going to put you more back in that limbic system.
Yeah.
It's just always going to put you back there. You get to choose love or you get to choose fear. It's really it is that simple. So based on the P's, you guys get to decide how you want to free yourself. So you get to cultivate the courage to fly, which means to first love yourself. And I'm Diane Kaiser. I'm the creator of this show, Cleanse, Heal, Ignite. Thank you again so much, Dr. Carolyn. I'll put all the show notes for how people can find you. And also any show notes that you said you would also links that you mentioned.
Yeah, a couple of links. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'll put in the show notes. You guys have an amazing day, whatever that looks like for you. It might look like you need to cry, it might look like you need to be angry, whatever that looks like. Just be okay with your emotions. They're showing you something. Embrace them, feel them, integrate them, let them go, whatever that looks like, but don't live inside of them, okay? We'll see you in the next show. If you guys have a question for future podcasts, DianeKaiser.com/ask. We are always listening and we're always loving. Take care for now.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If this episode really tugged at your soul and you're ready to have your personal breakthrough, we would love to have a heart-to-heart with you to get you crystal clear on 3 things. What do you want? What's standing in your way? And how do we get you to your soul goal in the fastest time possible? Visit my site, DianeKaiser.com/call to schedule your free 1-hour connection session with one of our warriors to map out exactly how you want to look, feel, and live. We've helped thousands of women warriors just like you all around the world free themselves from the symptoms and suffering they never thought possible. And you just might be our next success story. Talk soon.